What I'd say is starting small. So we know that starting small is such a good idea. And if people want to read any more about that, there's a really good book by a neuroscientist called BJ Fogg, and he literally talks about breaking it down into really small steps. So what we're working with is the reward system in the brain. So every time we take that small step, like putting our trainers by the door, then putting our trainers on the next day, then putting our trainers on and taking a step outside the front door, we're working with the reward system in the brain. The book title is called Micro Habits. It's a really valid point. I think there's a lot of things that's also grabbing our attention a lot. One of the things that we noticed in people's data is when they sit down and watch a movie but without their phone, the difference, and sharing that with somebody, the difference that has on their physiology, as in they get recovery, compared to sitting down in front of the TV, watching the TV, but also being on our phone. And what that did was that actually didn't create a recovery moment. So I think it's partly to do with the stresses, possibly partly to do with the distraction as well, is that we're just more activated, and agreed, we have less time potentially as well. I would do both. The ideal is that we have that opportunity to reflect and be aware, so that we can understand when we need to be proactive or be proactive where possible. And that's certainly what it suggests in terms of the research around elite performance, is that preparation is what helps, so that you can also implement it when you need to react as well. But I think for the purposes of all of this, it's just useful to have that understanding of all three are useful. It's not a binary thing. There are many things that might impact and influence us. Again, that might be beyond our control, but that might give us an increased vulnerability to things like burnout, for sure. They see that with armed forces. It's possible that experiences that we may have had from way back that were beyond our control, for example, could have an impact. What I think is super positive or really important is also that none of that is necessarily insurmountable either. So, for example, they've identified that certain people might be more sensitive to developing things like PTSD, certainly in things like the armed forces. But actually, interventions like self-compassion can really have a significant impact on things like PTSD. And I think that one of the things that can be so difficult for all of us, but yet ironically connects every single person, is feeling shame. So if we start to loosen that relationship, which is really hard, but know that we're not alone when we experience really difficult emotions, it's something that connects everybody.
In the NHS, burnout is not an individual thing. Generally, it's an organisational bit.
Yeah.
So it's not the individual that's really the kind of issue, if you like. It's the organisational lack of resources, overwork, overburden, overcommitment, all of those elements. And you do get burnout at individual levels. For example, entrepreneurs that are often quite solo workers will have high levels of burnout. So you can get that. But quite often, it's also an organisational issue. And unfortunately, the organisations often try and teach individual solutions and not deal with the organisational level of burnout, which can be problematic.
It's true. And I do agree completely, Justin. And it's something that's really important to be named. And I still go into organisations because I still think and believe we might not be able to change the culture of the organisation. But if there's anything that we can take from this that supports ourselves, then maybe that could be of value, or it might even be that it's of value to somebody else. My mission isn't to pretend that there aren't these things happening, but still to see if there's a micro moment of something for somebody that might be able to be useful. They say that there are 3 key things, which is the depersonalization. So feeling almost like you're not connected or not attached or kind of just numb to things. And then just a very prolonged deep fatigue. And I think this is the thing that when I was looking at some of the research this morning, it was saying that potentially quite a number of people are experiencing 2 out of 3 of the 3 key signs of burnout at times. Just that sense of not being able to get stuff done. I always imagine it almost feeling like you're walking walking through mud and that emotional exhaustion, or just deep fatigue, emotional exhaustion. And absolutely, as Justin put, the Maslow burnout inventory can be really useful too.
When we worked at one of the organizations, one of our tasks was to help leaders within that organization. This was before the days of things like the mental health first aid was really prevalent. And one of our tasks was to train managers and leaders in an organization to identify what signs of mental health issues and burnout and stress that wasn't helpful. So we taught them some of the signs that they could spot, and then we also linked them into an employee assistance program. It links into one of the other questions around what can organizations do, and it's really around changing the culture in the organization. But what we were trying to do there is really change the culture in the organization, because you've all probably heard that saying, you have the best strategy in the world, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you have a good strategy and a poor culture, that doesn't work. Poor strategy and quite a good culture, and that's probably more useful.
And I think some of the work that we did, so we used the model, what are the drivers, what are the drainers within the organisation, and got people to really work around what that was at different levels. And sometimes, let's say, the top weren't as aware of some of the things that were happening kind of lower down that were draining people. One of the things that I'm also remembering is a team that I worked with recently, and I got them to complete the drivers and drainers. And what the team was saying was that they really needed more self-compassion. So they had a fabulous team leader. He was incredibly self-compassionate. So it was such a blind spot for him that other people might be struggling with self-compassion. And it really took some data and kind of presenting it to him. We did something called a dotmocracy. So it's quite anonymous, and everybody sticks the green dot on something that they think is really important for the team. And that gave the visual evidence of actually this is something that's really important. So again, that was helping to shift the culture. And it was an absolutely fabulous leader. They very much excelled in something that supported their resilience, which everybody else in the team didn't. So it was just a blind spot, really.